The morning sun barely peeked through the thin curtains as David stared at the bright yellow paper stuck to his apartment door. His heart dropped as he read the bold letters at the top. Final notice, eviction. 30 days. That's all he had left before he and his 4-year-old daughter would be out on the street. He pulled the notice down quickly, hoping his little girl hadn't seen it through the window. But when he turned around, there she was standing in her favorite pink pajamas with the cartoon cats on them, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy, what's that paper?" she asked, her voice still thick with sleep. David crumpled it up and forced a smile. "Just some mail, sweetheart. Nothing important. How about we make some pancakes for breakfast?" Her face lit up immediately, and she clapped her small hands together. "With the smiley faces?" "Of course, with smiley faces," he said, picking her up and spinning her around once before setting her down. But even as she giggled, his mind was racing. The rent was 3 months behind, and after losing his job at the warehouse, their savings had disappeared faster than snow in summer. The warehouse had closed down without warning. One day he was loading trucks and earning enough to keep them afloat, and the next day he was standing in the unemployment line with dozens of other confused workers. That was 3 months ago, and despite sending out hundreds of job applications, today was the first real interview he'd managed to secure. Morrison and Associates. Even the name sounded important. Their office building was downtown, all glass and steel, the kind of place where people wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases. David had never worked in an office before, but he was willing to learn anything. The job was for an administrative assistant position, and while the pay wasn't amazing, it would be enough to catch up on rent and maybe even save a little for the future. As he mixed the pancake batter, his phone buzzed. "Unknown number, hello?" he answered, trying to keep his voice cheerful as his daughter colored at the small kitchen table. "Hi, this is Jenny from Sunshine Daycare. I'm really sorry, but we have to close today. Our main water pipe burst during the night and we're flooded. We won't be able to take any children until at least next week." David's stomach dropped. "Oh, okay. Thanks for letting me know. Again, I'm so sorry for the short notice. I know this is really inconvenient." "No problem," he lied. "Thanks for calling." He hung up and immediately dialed his babysitter's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Still voicemail. Finally, she called back. "David, sorry, I can't talk long. I'm at the emergency room with my mom. She had a bad fall this morning and I have no idea when I'll be able to leave." "Is she going to be okay?" David asked, genuinely concerned despite his growing panic. "I think so, but I definitely can't watch Lily today. I'm really sorry. Lily." His daughter looked up when she heard her name. Pancake batter somehow already smeared on her cheek despite not having eaten yet. "Of course. Don't worry about it. Take care of your mom," David said, ending the call. He stood there for a moment, phone still in his hand, feeling like the walls were closing in. The interview was at 10 a.m. It was now 7:30. He had no family in the city. They'd moved here 2 years ago for his ex-wife's job, and after she left them for her coworker, David had been too proud to move back home to his parents. He'd wanted to prove he could make it on his own. Now, staring at his daughter as she hummed a song from her favorite cartoon, while coloring a picture of a rainbow, he realized how foolish pride could be. He quickly went through his mental list of options. The neighbor upstairs was a nice older lady, but she used a walker and had told him she couldn't handle young children anymore. The couple next door both worked morning shifts. His friend from the warehouse lived across town and didn't have a car since his was repossessed last month. David sat down heavily at the kitchen table, and Lily immediately noticed his worried expression. "Daddy, you look sad," she said, reaching over to pat his hand with her small, sticky fingers. "I'm not sad, baby. Daddy's just thinking." "About what?" How could he explain it to a 4-year-old? How could he tell her that this interview might be their last chance to stay in their home? That he'd been lying awake every night for weeks, wondering what would happen to them if he couldn't find work. "Just grown-up stuff," he said instead. "Hey, do you want to play dress-up today?" Lily's eyes widened. She loved playing dress-up, but David usually saved it for weekends when he had more patience for the mess it created. "Can I wear my princess dress?" "You can wear whatever you want, sweetheart." As she ran to her room, chattering excitedly about which crown to choose, David pulled out his phone again. He scrolled through his contacts looking for anyone at all who might be able to help. But most of the numbers belonged to people from his old job. People who were dealing with their own problems now that the warehouse was closed. He thought about calling the company and asking to reschedule, but they'd already moved the interview once to accommodate his schedule. Plus, he'd researched the company online and learned they were only interviewing for one position. If he didn't show up today, they'd probably just offer it to someone else. Lily came running back into the kitchen wearing her shimmery purple princess dress, complete with a plastic tiara that was slightly too big and kept sliding down over her eyes. "Do I look beautiful, Daddy?" "You look perfect," he said, and meant it. Even with pancake batter on her face and her hair sticking up in 3 different directions, she was the most beautiful thing in his world. That's when the idea hit him. It was crazy, probably professional suicide, but what choice did he have? "Lily, how would you like to go on an adventure with Daddy today?" "What kind of adventure?" "Well, Daddy has to go to a very important meeting, and I was thinking, maybe you could come with me?" She bounced on her toes. "Like a real adventure?" "With both of us?" "Like a real adventure." David spent the next hour getting them both ready. He helped Lily change into her nicest dress, a navy blue one with small white flowers that his mother had sent for her birthday. He braided her hair as carefully as he could, though it still wasn't as neat as when the daycare teachers did it. For himself, he put on his only good suit. It was a few years old and a little tight around the shoulders now, but it was clean and pressed. He'd bought it for job interviews after college, back when he thought his business degree would lead to a corner office somewhere. Life had taken a different path, but maybe, just maybe, this suit would finally serve its purpose. As they walked to the bus stop, Lily skipping beside him and asking a million questions about where they were going, David tried to prepare himself for what was about to happen. He'd probably be turned away at the front desk. Or worse, they might let him into the interview just to see how he'd handle the awkwardness before politely showing him the door. But as he watched his daughter point excitedly at every dog they passed on the street, chattering away about which ones looked friendliest, he realized something. Maybe bringing her wasn't the end of the world. Maybe, just maybe, it would show them who he really was. Not just a desperate man looking for work, but a father who would do anything to take care of his child. The bus arrived, and as they climbed aboard, David squeezed his daughter's hand and whispered a silent prayer that this crazy plan might somehow work. The glass doors of Morrison and Associates were so tall they seemed to reach the sky. David looked up at the building, counting floors until his neck hurt. 32 stories of gleaming windows and success stories he could only dream about. Lily pressed her face against the cool glass door, leaving a small handprint. "Daddy, it's like a castle made of mirrors." "It kind of is, isn't it?" David said, gently pulling her hand away from the glass. He took a deep breath and straightened his tie one more time. His palms were sweating and his heart was beating so fast he wondered if other people could hear it. The moment they stepped inside, David felt like he'd entered a different world. The lobby was massive, with marble floors so shiny he could see his reflection. A fountain in the center sent water dancing in perfect arcs, and the sound echoed off the high ceiling. Everything was white and gold and expensive looking. Lily's eyes went wide as she took it all in. "Wow," she whispered, instinctively reaching for David's hand. But it wasn't just the fancy building that made David's stomach twist. It was the people. Men in perfectly pressed suits walked by with confident strides, talking on phones about deals and numbers that probably had more zeros than David had seen in his entire bank account. Women in sharp blazers and heels that clicked against the marble moved like they owned the place. And then there was David, in his old suit that was slightly too small, holding the hand of a 4-year-old in a flower dress. The staring started immediately. A woman in a gray pantsuit walked past them, her conversation stopping mid-sentence as she noticed Lily. Her eyes traveled from the little girl up to David, and her expression shifted from confusion to something that looked almost like disgust. She hurried away, whispering to her companion. 2 men waiting by the elevators turned to look at them. One nudged the other with his elbow, and they both stared openly. David felt his face getting hot. "Daddy, why is everyone looking at us?" Lily asked, her voice carrying in the quiet lobby. David's throat felt dry. "They're just curious, sweetheart. Don't worry about them." But more people were noticing now. A security guard near the entrance kept glancing over at them. 3 women sitting in the waiting area had stopped their conversation entirely and were watching them like they were some kind of strange show. David approached the reception desk, his legs feeling shaky. The woman behind the counter was young, maybe mid-20s, with perfect makeup and hair pulled back so tight it made her forehead look stretched. Her name tag read Jennifer, and she was typing something on her computer without looking up. "Excuse me," David said softly. Jennifer continued typing for another few seconds before slowly raising her eyes. When she saw Lily standing next to David, her perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice carrying a tone that suggested she really didn't want to help at all. "I have an interview at 10 with Mrs. Rodriguez, David Chen." Jennifer's eyes bounced between David and Lily several times, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "And is this person with you?" "This is my daughter, Lily." The typing in the lobby seemed to stop. Even the fountain sounded quieter. Jennifer stared at them both for what felt like forever. "Sir, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this is a business meeting. A professional interview." David's face burned with embarrassment. "I understand that. I had a childcare emergency this morning and I didn't want to miss the interview." "I was hoping—" "You were hoping to bring a child to a corporate interview?" Jennifer's voice was getting louder, and David noticed more people turning to look at them. Lily tugged on David's sleeve. "Daddy, did I do something wrong?" "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong," David said quickly, kneeling down to her level. But even as he said it, he felt like maybe he had done something wrong. Maybe this was the stupidest idea he'd ever had. Jennifer picked up her phone. "I need to check with HR about this situation. That's what his daughter was to these people, a situation." While Jennifer made her call, speaking in hushed tones that were clearly about them, David noticed the other people in the lobby. There were about 6 other people waiting, all dressed in expensive suits, all carrying leather briefcases or designer bags. They were probably there for interviews too, David realized. His competition. A woman in a black suit with silver hair whispered something to the man sitting next to her. They both looked at David and Lily, then looked away quickly when they noticed David watching them. Another man, younger, maybe in his 30s, shook his head slightly and went back to reading something on his tablet, but David caught him glancing over several more times. "Daddy, I'm thirsty," Lily said. "Just a few more minutes, okay, sweetheart?" "But I'm really thirsty." David looked around and spotted a water cooler near the waiting area. "Okay, let's get you some water." As they walked across the marble floor, their footsteps echoed loudly. Lily's small shoes made tiny clicking sounds that seemed to announce their presence to everyone. David felt like every person in the lobby was watching them move. At the water cooler, David fumbled with the little paper cups. His hands were shaking slightly and he dropped the first cup. It fluttered to the ground and the sound seemed impossibly loud in the quiet lobby. "It's okay, Daddy," Lily said, picking up the cup and handing it back to him. "Sometimes I drop things too." Her innocent comment somehow made everything worse. David felt tears threatening behind his eyes. What was he doing? What kind of father brings his 4-year-old to a job interview? What kind of desperate person thinks this could possibly work? They walked back to the reception area where Jennifer was still on the phone. She kept looking at them while she talked, and David caught words like inappropriate and never seen anything like this. The other people waiting had formed what looked like an invisible wall between themselves and David and Lily. They sat on one side of the waiting area, and David and Lily sat on the other, like there was some kind of invisible line that couldn't be crossed. Lily started to fidget. She swung her legs back and forth in the big leather chair, and the movement made soft squeaking sounds. David put his hand gently on her knee to still her, but she was getting restless. "How much longer, Daddy?" "I don't know, baby." A man in a navy suit checked his expensive-looking watch and sighed loudly. Another woman shifted in her seat and crossed her arms. Jennifer finally hung up the phone and walked over to them. Her smile looked forced and fake. "Mr. Chen, I've spoken with our HR department and they're concerned about having a minor in the building during a professional interview. There are liability issues and frankly, this is highly unusual." "I understand it's unusual," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I really need this interview. Is there any way—" "Daddy," Lily interrupted, tugging on his sleeve again. "I need to use the bathroom." The timing couldn't have been worse. Jennifer's fake smile disappeared completely. "Sir, perhaps it would be best if you rescheduled for a time when you have proper childcare arrangements." David felt something break inside his chest. 3 months of job searching, Hundreds of applications, and this was his first real chance. And now it was slipping away because he'd made a desperate choice. But just as he opened his mouth to ask Jennifer where the bathroom was, the elevator doors across the lobby opened with a soft ding. And everything was about to change. Jennifer looked at her watch and then back at David. "Mr. Chen, your interview was scheduled for 10 a.m. It's now 10:15. David's heart sank. He knew what that meant. In the business world, being late was almost as bad as not showing up at all. And here he was, not only late but also causing a scene with his daughter. "I understand I'm late," David said, trying to keep his voice calm even though he felt like screaming inside. "But if there's any chance on David Chen?" A voice called from across the lobby. David turned to see a woman in her 50s walking toward them. She wore a dark gray suit and carried a folder in her hands. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun and her expression was all business. This had to be Mrs. Rodriguez, the person he was supposed to interview with. "Yes, that's me," David said, standing up quickly. Lily hopped down from her chair and stayed close to his side. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped in front of them and looked down at Lily, then back at David. Her face showed no emotion at all, which somehow felt worse than if she had looked angry. "I see you've brought someone with you today," she said in a flat voice. "Yes, ma'am. This is my daughter Lily. I had a childcare emergency this morning and Mrs. Rodriguez held up her hand to stop him from talking. "Mr. Chen, I've been conducting interviews for 15 years. In all that time, I have never had a candidate bring a child to a professional interview." David felt every person in the lobby watching them. The silence was so complete he could hear the air conditioning humming overhead. "I completely understand how unusual this is," David said, "and I'm sorry for any inconvenience. But I really need this job and I didn't want to miss the opportunity." "Daddy, is the nice lady mad at us?" Lily asked in a whisper that everyone could probably hear. Mrs. Rodriguez looked down at Lily again. For just a second, David thought he saw her expression soften slightly. But then it was back to business. "Mr. Chen, please follow me. We'll conduct the interview as scheduled." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Really? Even with the conference room is this way?" As they walked toward the elevator, David noticed the other people in the lobby watching their every step. Some looked shocked that Mrs. Rodriguez was actually going through with the interview. Others looked like they thought it was unfair that David was getting special treatment. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like it took forever. Mrs. Rodriguez stood perfectly still, staring at the numbers as they climbed. Lily pressed her face against the shiny elevator wall, making faces at her reflection. "Daddy, look, I can see myself everywhere," she said, pointing at the mirrored walls. "That's very nice, sweetheart, but remember to use your quiet voice, okay?" When the elevator doors opened, they walked down a long hallway lined with glass offices. David could see people inside working at computers, talking on phones, and sitting in meetings. Everything looked so professional and important. Mrs. Rodriguez led them to a large conference room with a long table and many chairs. The walls were covered with certificates and awards, and there was a huge window that looked out over the city. "Please have a seat," Mrs. Rodriguez said, gesturing to the chairs at the far end of the table. David helped Lily into a chair that was way too big for her, then sat down next to her. Mrs. Rodriguez sat across from them and opened her folder. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to explain something to you. This interview is for a position that requires professionalism, reliability, and the ability to handle unexpected situations with grace." David nodded. "I understand. Good. Now, Mr. Chen, tell me about yourself." David had practiced this answer 100 times in the mirror at home. He talked about his education, his work experience at the warehouse, and his skills with computers and organization. But the whole time he was speaking, he was aware of Lily sitting next to him, swinging her legs and looking around the room. "And why do you want to work at Morrison & Associates?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. "Well, I've researched your company and I'm impressed by your reputation for excellence. I think my skills would be a good fit for—" "Daddy, I'm bored," Lily interrupted in a stage whisper. David felt his face turn red. "Lily, remember what we talked about. Daddy is having an important conversation. But when will it be over?" Mrs. Rodriguez was writing something in her folder. David couldn't see what it was, but he was pretty sure it wasn't good. "I'm sorry," David said. "She's usually very well behaved. This is all new to her." "I see. Mrs. Rodriguez said without looking up from her writing. The interview continued, but David felt like he was fighting a losing battle. Every few minutes, Lily would whisper something or fidget in her chair. At one point, she started quietly humming a song from her favorite cartoon. "Lily, please," David whispered. "I'm trying to be quiet, Daddy, but the song is stuck in my head." Mrs. Rodriguez asked about his computer skills, his experience with customer service, and his ability to work under pressure. David tried his best to give good answers, but he could tell she was getting more and more annoyed with the interruptions. Then came the question he had been dreading. "Mr. Chen, this position requires someone who can be here early and stay late when needed, someone who can travel occasionally for client meetings. How would your current situation affect your ability to meet these requirements?" David's mouth went dry. He knew what she was really asking. How could someone with a 4-year-old daughter be reliable? How could he travel for work? How could he stay late when he had to pick up his child from daycare? "I understand the requirements," David said slowly. "And I want to assure you that my daughter would never interfere with my work responsibilities. I have backup childcare plans and, Daddy, what's a responsibility?" Lily asked. Mrs. Rodriguez set down her pen and looked at them both. Her expression was unreadable. "Mr. Chen, I have to ask, if you couldn't find childcare for this interview, how can I trust that you'll be able to handle the demands of this position?" It was a fair question, and David knew it. But it still felt like a punch to the stomach. "Ma'am, losing my job at the warehouse wasn't my choice. The company closed down without warning. I've been looking for work for 3 months, and this is my first real interview. I brought my daughter today because I was desperate, not because I'm irresponsible." "I need the bathroom," Lily announced suddenly. David closed his eyes for a second. "Lily, can you wait just a little longer?" "No, Daddy, I really need to go now." Mrs. Rodriguez stood up. "The restroom is down the hall. Second door on your left." "Thank you," David said, helping Lily down from her chair. "We'll be right back." As they walked toward the door, Mrs. Rodriguez called after them. "Mr. Chen, when you return, I'd like to ask you about a specific scenario. How you would handle a difficult client who was upset about a delayed project." David nodded. "Of course." But as he walked down the hallway holding his daughter's hand, he couldn't shake the feeling that the interview was already over. Mrs. Rodriguez had made up her mind. She was probably just being polite by continuing the questions. When they reached the bathroom, Lily looked up at him with her big brown eyes. "Daddy, did I mess up your important meeting?" David knelt down and hugged her tight. "No, sweetheart. You didn't mess up anything. Sometimes grown-up things are just complicated." But even as he said it, David wondered if bringing her had been the biggest mistake of his life, and when they walked back into that conference room, he was about to find out just how much worse things could get. When David and Lily returned to the conference room, Mrs. Rodriguez was no longer alone. 2 more people had joined her at the long table. A younger woman in a sharp black suit and an older man with gray hair and thick glasses. David's heart sank even further. Having more people watch his interview fall apart was the last thing he needed. "Mr. Chen, please take a seat," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice even colder than before. "These are my colleagues from the hiring committee, Ms. Parker from Human Resources, and Mr. Williams, our operations manager." David helped Lily back into her chair and sat down, feeling like he was facing a firing squad rather than an interview panel. The 3 interviewers sat perfectly straight, their hands folded on the table, looking at him and Lily like they were some kind of science experiment gone wrong. "Now then," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, "let's discuss that scenario I mentioned. Imagine you're dealing with an angry client who's upset about a project delay. How would you handle that situation?" David took a deep breath and tried to focus. This was his chance to show them he could be professional despite the circumstances. "Well, first I would listen carefully to understand exactly what the client's concerns are. Then I would acknowledge their frustration and apologize for any inconvenience caused by the delay. Next I would—" "Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging on his sleeve. "That lady looks mean." David's face burned with embarrassment. Ms. Parker's expression had indeed grown even more stern, if that was possible. "Lily, please," David whispered back. "Remember what we talked about." "But she's staring at me funny." Mr. Williams cleared his throat loudly. "Perhaps we should address the obvious issue here. Mr. Chen, do you understand that this behavior is completely inappropriate for a professional setting?" "I apologize," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. My daughter is normally very well behaved. This is just a very unusual situation for both of us. Unusual? Ms. Parker spoke for the first time, her voice sharp as a knife. Mr. Chen, this isn't unusual. This is unthinkable. In 20 years of conducting interviews, I have never seen anything like this. I understand how this looks, David said, desperation creeping into his voice. But I really need this job. I'm facing eviction and I've been unemployed for 3 months. When my childcare fell through this morning, I had to make a choice between missing this opportunity or bringing my daughter. I chose to be here because this job means everything to our future. The 3 interviewers exchanged glances. David could practically see them having a silent conversation about how quickly they could end this disaster. Mr. Chen, Mrs. Rodriguez said, let me be very clear. This position requires someone who can handle unexpected challenges with professionalism and good judgment. What you've done today demonstrates a serious lack of both. Those words hit David like a physical blow. He had known this was a long shot, but hearing it said so directly made his chest feel tight. I understand your concerns, he managed to say. But sometimes parents have to make difficult choices. I'm not proud of this situation, but I am proud that I didn't give up. I'm proud that I found a way to be here. Daddy, why does everyone look angry? Lily asked in her small voice. Before David could answer, something unexpected happened. The conference room door opened and an older man walked in. He was probably in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes. He wore an expensive-looking suit, but unlike the others, he was smiling. Sorry to interrupt, the man said. I was just walking by and heard voices. I hope you don't mind if I join you for a moment? Mrs. Rodriguez immediately stood up and her entire demeanor changed. Of course not, sir. We were just conducting an interview for the administrative assistant position. Wonderful, the man said, looking around the room. His eyes landed on Lily, who was swinging her legs in the big chair. And who is this lovely young lady? That's the candidate's daughter, Ms. Parker said, her voice tight with disapproval. But instead of looking shocked or annoyed like the others, the man's smile grew wider. He walked over to where Lily was sitting and knelt down to her eye level. Hello there, he said gently. What's your name? Lily looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. I'm Lily, she said shyly. I'm 4 years old. 4 years old. That's a very important age, the man said seriously. And what do you have there? Lily held up a small stuffed rabbit that David hadn't even noticed she'd been carrying. This is Mr. Hoppers. He goes everywhere with me. Mr. Hoppers is a very handsome rabbit, the man said. Does he like adventures? Oh, yes. We went on an adventure today. We came to Daddy's important meeting in the castle made of mirrors. The man laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to change the entire atmosphere in the room. A castle made of mirrors. What a perfect way to describe our building. David watched this interaction with growing confusion. Who was this man? And why were the interviewers treating him with such obvious respect and deference? The man stood up and looked at the interview panel. I take it this is an unusual situation? Very unusual, sir, Mrs. Rodriguez said quickly. The candidate brought his child to the interview without any prior notice. We were just explaining to him why this is inappropriate. I see, the man said thoughtfully. He turned to David. And you are? David Chen, sir. I'm interviewing for the administrative assistant position. And why did you bring your daughter today, David? David felt like he was being given one last chance to explain himself, though he wasn't sure why this stranger's opinion mattered. My daycare flooded this morning, and my babysitter had a family emergency. I've been unemployed for 3 months since the warehouse I worked at closed down. We're facing eviction, and this was my first real interview opportunity. I know it wasn't the right choice, but I couldn't bear to miss this chance. The man nodded slowly. What kind of work did you do at the warehouse? I was a supervisor. I managed inventory, coordinated with delivery drivers, handled customer complaints, and supervised a team of 12 people. And you did all that while raising a daughter on your own? David glanced at Lily, who was making Mr. Hoppers hop along the edge of the table. Yes, sir. Her mother left us 2 years ago. The man was quiet for a moment, seeming to think about something. Then he did something that made everyone in the room gasp. He walked to the other end of the conference room, picked up 2 chairs, one regular-sized and one smaller, and carried them over to the table. He placed the small chair right next to David's seat and the regular chair across from them. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ms. Parker, Mr. Williams, he said as he settled into his chair. I think we should continue this interview properly. with both members of the Chen family present. The three interviewers looked stunned. Ms. Parker's mouth actually fell open slightly. "Sir, I'm not sure that's..." Mrs. Rodriguez began. "I'm very sure," the man said firmly but still kindly. "Please continue with your questions." David stared at this stranger who had just completely changed the direction of his interview. He still didn't know who the man was, but something in his manner, the way the others deferred to him, the confidence with which he'd rearranged the seating, suggested he had the authority to make this decision. Lily looked up at David with wide, curious eyes. "Daddy, is the nice man going to help us?" David squeezed her hand gently. "I think he might be, sweetheart." And for the first time all morning, David felt a tiny spark of hope flickering in his chest. The atmosphere in the conference room had completely changed. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ms. Parker, and Mr. Williams sat straighter in their chairs, clearly trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected turn of events. The older man, who had just rearranged the seating, smiled warmly at David and Lily. "Now then," he said, settling into his chair, "let's start this interview over. But this time let's do it right." Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, perhaps I should introduce you. Mr. Chen, this is..." "I can introduce myself," the man said with a gentle wave of his hand. He looked directly at David. "I'm Robert Morrison. I own this company." David's eyes went wide. The CEO. He had just spent the last 10 minutes talking to the CEO of Morrison & Associates, and he hadn't even known it. "Mr. Morrison," David stammered, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea." "Please don't apologize," Mr. Morrison said. "You've been through enough this morning." He turned to Lily, who was still making her stuffed rabbit hop along the table. "And Miss Lily, how are you enjoying your adventure so far?" "It's been scary," Lily admitted. "Everyone looked mad at me and Daddy, but you seem nice." Mr. Morrison chuckled. "Well, I try to be nice, especially to brave little girls who go on adventures with their fathers." Ms. Parker shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Sir, while I understand your kindness, we do need to consider the professional implications." "Ms. Parker," Mr. Morrison said, his voice still kind but carrying a note of authority, "let me tell you a story. 23 years ago, I was a single father just like David here. My wife had passed away from cancer, and I was trying to raise my 6-year-old daughter while building this company." The room went completely silent. Even Lily stopped playing with her rabbit to listen. "One day, I had the most important board meeting of my life. Investors were coming to decide whether to fund our expansion. It was make or break time for Morrison & Associates. That morning, my babysitter called in sick, and my daughter's school had a water main break. Sound familiar?" David nodded, hardly believing what he was hearing. "I brought my daughter to that board meeting," Mr. Morrison continued. "She sat in a chair just like Lily is sitting now, coloring pictures while I presented our 5-year plan. Do you know what happened?" "What happened?" Lily asked, completely absorbed in the story. "One of the investors said something I'll never forget. He said, 'Any man who can manage a presentation this detailed while keeping a 6-year-old happy and quiet has the kind of multitasking skills we need in a CEO.' Mrs. Rodriguez looked stunned. "I had no idea, sir. That little girl who came to the board meeting with me, she's now Dr. Catherine Morrison Chen, head of pediatric surgery at Children's Hospital. And she still tells people that the day she learned what determination looks like was the day she watched her father refuse to give up on his dreams, even when it meant bringing her along." David felt tears forming in his eyes. He had spent the entire morning feeling like a failure, like he had made the worst possible decision. But here was one of the most successful people he'd ever met telling him he understood. "Mr. Morrison," David said quietly, "I want you to know that bringing Lily wasn't my first choice, or my second, or my 10th. But after 3 months of unemployment and facing eviction, I couldn't let this opportunity slip away." "I know," Mr. Morrison said, "and that tells me more about your character than any interview question ever could." Lily had been listening to the grown-ups talk, and now she tugged on David's sleeve. "Daddy, does this mean the nice man isn't mad at us?" "No, sweetheart, Mr. Morrison isn't mad at us." "Good," Lily said, then turned to Mr. Morrison. "Do you want to meet Mr. Hoppers? He's very friendly." Mr. Morrison accepted the stuffed rabbit with the same seriousness he might have shown to an important business contract. "Mr. Hoppers, it's a pleasure to meet you. I can see you take very good care of Lily." While this was happening, David noticed that the 3 interviewers were having their own quiet conversation. Ms. Parker was whispering something urgently to Mrs. Rodriguez, who kept shaking her head. Mr. Morrison handed the rabbit back to Lily and turned to David. Now, let's talk about this job, Mrs. Rodriguez. What can you tell me about David's qualifications? Mrs. Rodriguez looked flustered. Well, sir, we had only just begun to discuss his experience when the situation became complicated. Then let's uncomplicate it, Mr. Morrison said. David, tell me about your work at the warehouse. For the next 20 minutes, David found himself in the strangest interview of his life. Mr. Morrison asked thoughtful questions about leadership, problem-solving, and handling difficult situations. But every few minutes he would also ask Lily about her coloring or comment on how well-behaved she was being. At one point, Lily accidentally knocked over a cup of water that someone had brought in. David immediately jumped up to clean it, apologizing profusely while he soaked up the water with napkins. But instead of looking annoyed, Mr. Morrison watched how David handled the situation, staying calm, cleaning efficiently, and comforting Lily, who was upset about the accident. You know, Mr. Morrison said as David finished cleaning, that's exactly the kind of grace under pressure we need in this position. Ms. Parker couldn't stay quiet any longer. Sir, with all due respect, we need to consider the practical aspects. What about travel requirements? Late meetings? Deadlines? Mr. Morrison looked at her seriously. Ms. Parker, what do you think requires better time management skills? Coordinating a shipping schedule for 12 drivers? Or getting a 4-year-old ready for daycare every morning while making breakfast and packing lunch? I'm not sure I understand the comparison, she said. Let me ask you this, Mr. Morrison continued. Have you ever tried to negotiate with a tired 4-year-old who doesn't want to put on her shoes? Because I guarantee you that requires more patience and creativity than most client meetings. Lily giggled. I don't like putting on my shoes either. See, Mr. Morrison said with a grin. Universal experience. By the end of the interview, something amazing had happened. The 3 other interviewers had stopped looking at David and Lily like they were a problem to be solved. Instead, they were asking genuine questions about his experience and skills. Mr. Morrison stood up and everyone else followed. David, I want to offer you this position. But more than that, I want to make sure you have what you need to succeed. Ms. Parker, I want you to research our options for on-site child care. And Mrs. Rodriguez, let's look at our policies about flexible schedules for parents. David could hardly believe what he was hearing. Mr. Morrison, I don't know what to say. Say you'll start Monday, Mr. Morrison said, extending his hand. And say you'll bring Mr. Hoppers to visit my office sometime. I'd like to hear more of his adventures. Lily jumped up from her chair. Really, Mr. Hoppers would love that. As they shook hands, Mr. Morrison said quietly to David, You know what I saw today? A father who would do anything to provide for his child. A man who stayed calm under pressure and turned a potentially embarrassing situation into a teaching moment. Those are exactly the qualities we need here. Walking out of the building that day, David felt like he was floating. Lily skipped beside him, chattering excitedly about her new friend Mr. Morrison and how she was going to tell Mr. Hoppers all about their successful adventure. Daddy, she said as they waited for the bus, I'm glad we came on this adventure together. Me too. Sweetheart, David said, squeezing her hand. Me too. Years later, David would become one of the most respected managers at Morrison & Associates. He would speak at conferences about leadership and work-life balance. But he would always remember that the day that changed their lives forever was the day he learned that sometimes your biggest weakness can become your greatest strength.